Thank you very much, Michael, for accepting talking to us. You are a scientific director at the University of Zurich, and we understand that you are managing a seed bank. Could you tell us a bit more about what your job is about?
Well, the seed bank is just part of my job. Otherwise, I do research, mainly on ferns. I do teaching. I have PhD students. I work in the botanical garden. Part of my job is the seed bank. And I mean, seed banks have been around for quite a while. Ours started 4 years ago. And the idea of the seed bank is to provide the conservation organizations with ways of preserving seeds of endangered plant species or endangered populations. And of course, the aim is not just to store the seeds, but to eventually be able to use them. So we also have seeds for research. So if somebody needs to study the genetics of a threatened plant species, they're welcome to ask us, and we provide them with seeds. So that's very generally the idea of the seed bank.
What is the main process to store these seeds?
Okay, so yeah, it's not that easy, because since we're focusing on rare plant species, finding populations is a challenge. And then finding populations that are big enough is an even bigger challenge, because it makes no sense to preserve 10 seeds of something. I mean, if they're the last 10 seeds in the world, we'll preserve them, but typically you want to have, our ideal goal is 5,000 seeds for a single, what we call an accession, which is a species at a given site. Because when you have that many seeds, then you have the genetic diversity that's behind it, right? And we know that that's needed for the long-term survival of species. So we work together with the national conservation organizations who tell us where the populations are. Then we have to get the permits, because they're threatened species, so we cannot just go and collect the seeds. Then the trick is to get to the population at the right time, and very often this requires like 3 visits or so. So the first time you go when the plants are flowering, because then you can find them, and you can identify them and make sure that they are the right species. Then you sort of get an idea of when they might be having ripe seeds, and then you have to go back at that time. And usually you're a little bit early because you're careful, right? I mean, the problem is if the seeds are ripe and they fall out, that's it. You have to return next year. And so getting the right time is tricky. And some of these, they're remote mountains, so you hike hours up and then you go there and it's like, oh, they're not there yet, so you can go down again.
Mm-hmm.
And once we have the seeds, they need to be cleaned. That varies a lot. Some of them are really easy to clean, but imagine, rose fruits. You know what rose fruits look like? These
Yes.
red things with the tiny little seeds,
Mm-hmm.
and cleaning that out is very time consuming. So you clean them. When they're cleaned, we count a few, weigh them, then weigh all of them, so we have an idea of how many seeds we have. Then we need to dry them down stepwise to about 15% humidity, because the drier they are, the better they survive long term. And then we freeze them at minus 20 degrees, and that way they can be stored for decades, although that also varies between species. And we do germination experiments. So before we freeze the seeds, we take 50 seeds or so, and we put them in little agar petri dishes in a growth chamber.
Yes.
And we look at how many germinate. That gives us an idea of the quality of the seeds at the beginning. And then after half a year of freezing, we again take out 50
Yes.
seeds.
Exactly.
Do this again. To do it properly, it's a lot of very hard work.
You cannot store all the seeds, right?
No.
You mean like
No,
there's some
seeds that
species
cannot be stored that don't survive
okay.
the freezing, or don't have enough storage material to survive this.
Okay.
Gregory would know these numbers better. But in our latitudes, like in Switzerland, I think the percentage of species that can be stored is like 80 or 90%, somewhere around there. So the vast majority of plant species can be stored. In the tropics, it's much less. And the reason for this is that here, typically, seeds are produced in summer or in autumn. They fall down, and then they wait through the winter and germinate in spring.
Yes.
So they have their internal mechanism is used to falling into dormancy and surviving cold. In the tropics, many seeds fall to the ground and germinate immediately because you can grow the whole year, so there's no reason to wait, and actually it's detrimental to wait because, of course, birds and insects and God knows what running around trying to eat the seeds, right?
Yes.
So the shorter the time between ripening of the seeds and the germination is, the better. And these seeds then don't have their internal ability to dry out and remain in a dormant state for a long time.
And this you are doing with multiple species at the same time, let's say.
Yeah, of course. So, for example, now we have a project that is funded by the Ministry of Agriculture of Switzerland, let's call it like that. And they approached us to collect seeds from economically important plants. And so together with the seed bank in Geneva, we work together. And there we have funding for a 3-year project where we have to collect about 300 samples of economically important plants that are endangered so that the genetic resources are maintained. You call these crop wild relatives, so the wild relatives of crop plants. I mean, I'm sure you've heard that some cultivated plant species are threatened by diseases and stuff like that, and then you often go back to related species that are in the field, and you look if they, for example, have a resistance against a pathogen or against a certain herbivore, and you cross them, or these days you use CRISPR and just put in the genes anyway, but you take the genetic information from wild plants, put them into the cultivated plants to make them more resistance against fungi, more resistance against drought, whatever. And so if the species go extinct, this information goes extinct.
Yes.
And so by having the seeds in the seed bank, then pharmaceutical companies or crop producing companies can contact us, and we provide them with the seeds, and they can use those to improve plant health and that kind of stuff.
And when you said you're going to collect 300 samples, so it's 300 samples of different species, so meaning you said 5,000 seeds per sample?
It's about 100 species and ideally 3 samples per species because different populations have different adaptations.
Okay.
So if you really want to have the genetic information of a species, you cannot just do one population.
Okay.
That's a little bit more than 100 species with 3 populations each, and ideally 5,000 seeds of each. In some cases, that's impossible. Very small populations, big seeds, then we go down to 500. That's the lowest. But you can imagine, I mean, 500 sounds a lot, but then somebody comes and says, you know, we want to do research on this. And we cannot just give them 10 seeds. There's no genetic diversity in that. So, you know, you have to give them a couple of 100 seeds, and then you very quickly reach the limit when you only have 500. Yeah.
How many species from what you store in the seed bank get actually replanted in the real world, let's say?
So far, very few. We hope, of course, that this changes in the future, but so far it's mainly the storing part.
Okay.
Our counterparts in Geneva, they've been running the seed bank for a longer time, and they've had specific projects, and we also have one now, where, in our case, it's they will build new stuff somewhere, and there's a wetland, a pond. which has some interesting plant species. And this pond will disappear, and so these populations will be lost. And so they contacted us. We collect the seeds, we store the seeds, they build everything, and then they will make a new pond and we put the plants back there. That's the idea, so that this local population survives. And the same has been done, for example, when new train tracks have been built. You destroy valuable habitat, new habitat gets created, the seeds are put in the seed bank and then made available. I don't expect, or let's put it the other way around, I expect that most of the seeds that we store will never be used.
Yeah, obviously.
But it's a little bit like a library, you know?
Yeah.
If you have a big library, you don't expect every book to be read all the time, but you want to be able to find every single book when you need it.
Yes.
And it's the same with the seed bank, right? It's essentially what we're doing is an insurance thing. Like it's like your health insurance. You don't want to need to use it, but if you need to use it, you want it to work, and it's the same here. Ideally, let's put it like this: you could even turn this argument around. Ideally, our seeds will never be needed, because that would mean that everything is going fine out.
Do you need help to collect seeds? Do you need, obviously you're not doing this on your own, you've got, I guess, people working with you.
It would be absolutely impossible.
Yeah.
Like, for this project that I talked about with the crop wild relatives, most of the funding that we got is to pay individual people or what are they called in English? In German, it's Ökobüros, so environmental consultancy, private environmental consultancy bureaus. Across all of Switzerland, I think we have contracts with 17 individuals or bureaus.
Wow.
Who are in different parts of Switzerland, know the local flora. In many cases, they know the local populations, and we pay them per accession. So they get a list, these 20 things we need from you, and they get paid a fixed amount per accession. And then they are the ones who go out. And we just do the coordination, we keep track of who's doing what, and they send us the stuff, and the cleaning, and the freezing, and the germination experiments, that's also all done by us. But the collection would be impossible. And also, here in the canton of Zurich, besides this crop wild relative, we are also having a project here, and there most of the collecting is being done by volunteers. Again,
Okay.
people who like to go outside, people who know the plants,
Mm-hmm.
and now we have a team of about 10 or 12 very good people who are very reliable, and they go out and collect the seeds. But in order for this to work, for example, for our new collectors for the Crop Wild Relatives project, we had a full day training in May where we brought everybody together from Switzerland, and the morning was the whole theory behind it, and in the afternoon we went out into the field and collected some seeds so that they really know how to do it and we get the seeds the way we need them. Otherwise it would be a waste of time and effort.
Yes. And if volunteers want to join your actions and help you, should they contact you directly, or what should they contact?
Yeah, either me or Gregory Jäggli, who is the guy who actually does the work, right? When I always say we, essentially I mean Gregory is doing the stuff and I just sit there and tell him, very good, you're doing very good. Yeah. But this information is all on the website of the seed bank. The first seed bank of our kind was started 20 years ago in Geneva, and ours has now been running for 4 years, and a few years before that the idea started and we started organizing everything. Finding the right people was not easy, finding the starting fund was not easy, but now it is a timely point to do these things because, I mean, we know all the biodiversity crisis and climate change. We know how many species are threatened with extinction. And Switzerland has signed an international convention that many countries have signed, where the aim is to have at least 75% of the threatened species of a country preserved in what we call ex situ conservation. Ex situ means not inside, which is in situ, in their natural habitat, but ex situ would be animals in zoos, living plants in botanical gardens, or seeds in seed banks. And so far, I don't know the current numbers, but so far, I mean, we are at somewhere between 20 and 30%, I think, of the threatened plant species in Switzerland are in some way preserved ex situ. So we still have a long way to go, and that was part of the motivation of starting the seed bank, to provide, because, you know, I mean, it requires a certain infrastructure, it requires expertise. A seed bank is not something that you can build up locally on a small scale. It just doesn't make sense. That's where you need a few centralized places where everything is put together and stored in a professional way, and that was the idea behind this.
Is there a special message that you would like to pass?
I think one thing that always bothers me, and maybe this might be a point of communicating it at this moment, is that very often conservation of biodiversity is justified in terms of the services that biodiversity provides. So, you know, we need forests because they produce oxygen and God knows what. And then we justify the individual species in terms of that they play a role in the ecosystems, etc., etc. I mean, you've heard all these things, right? I mean, we hear them all the time, right? How biodiversity, everything is tightly co-evolved, and you know, every single species plays a role. And this is a statement that bothers me. First, it bothers me because it's not scientifically supported. Many species, you can take them out and there is no problem. I mean, you know, like, let's take a very stupid example. Earthworms. Here in Europe, we consider earthworms to be highly important for agriculture, for the soils, for everything, right? Did you know that before the Europeans went there, there were no earthworms in North America? So the whole ecosystem there was adapted to not have earthworms. And it's not like it didn't work, right? It worked perfectly well, it's just in a different way.
Yeah.
And now actually earthworms are considered invasive in North America. But the point I try to make is I find it problematic if we justify the right of an organism to live by a service it provides.
Yeah.
If you apply this rationale to humans, we very quickly get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
You know, because on the downside, it means if you do not provide the service to the community, you are not worth.
Exactly.
And that cannot, and we don't accept it in humans for a good reason. We shouldn't adapt this kind of thinking in biodiversity, I think. Each species has its right to live just because it exists and not because it does something that we need. Yeah, maybe that's something that I find important.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you so much.